Early morning seminary teachers. Dear friends, there is a throne in heaven for you.
Welcome to Seminary Teachers Helping Seminary Teachers, the podcast where we share ideas, tools, and encouragement to strengthen your teaching and bless your students. Each episode will explore practical tips, inspired resources, and real experiences from the classroom, so you can feel supported and confident in your calling. Whether you're new to teaching or a seasoned instructor, we're here to help each other teach with power and joy.
All right, teachers, welcome back. We got just 2 more weeks. That's according to the pacing calendar. That's all we got.
Insert the hallelujah chorus. Hallelujah.
I didn't do this on purpose at first. I had students that would do it and they'd walk up to the board and they go, this many days left. Did you guys have like a countdown as you got to the end? I just peeked into my wife's class and they totally have a countdown. And so the countdown, their countdown, I should see if I could show you, but their countdown shows how many days left to seminary. And then they have the readings next to it, what the required readings are and how many pages for each of the readings, almost as a constant reminder. Hey, you got 12 more days, get these done so that they can get that marked. Right. So
like it. Whatever gets them in there and doing it.
This week, we have the final Assess Your Learning number 10. Okay, words of advice, final assessment. Thoughts?
Do it.
Do it.
Don't skip it.
You need to audit what you've done in the past. You've had these opportunities to assess your learning this semester. You need to check and see if there's any students who have not been present for the previous Assess Your Learnings. If they've been there, go into WISE 2 right now and mark yes if they've been present for those previous assessments so you can see if anybody's missed it. If anybody has missed it and they typically come, you need to make sure they're present for Assess Your Learning 10. You may want to actually even move it. What days are you going to be here this week? Okay, we're going to do Assess Your Learning on that day because I need you to take this. Like, just make sure that everybody's been covered. And if you need help,
there are a few teachers that I've become aware of that are I'm just happy that they're here teachers, and which is very welcoming and it's all very positive. But we teachers still, you have an administrative role because parents want their students to graduate. And so we still have to do that administrative stuff so they can earn that credit.
Yeah.
I would say this Assess Your Learning it's kind of a nice sum up too. It's asking the question, why do you think it's important to reflect on your spiritual memories? And what we're talking about this week is very spiritual experiences for those people in the past that are navigating religion and politics and just all of things of life. And so to kind of let's put our understanding in what it would be like for them to go through these things, but also what is it for you? What spiritual memories do you have in knowing who Jesus Christ is for yourself? So I do like this. I like the way that they're going in that direction, summing up the whole semester. If you did the idea of having them write their testimonies at the beginning of the semester, this is a good time to pull out their past testimonies and have them add to the things that they've learned. That is also an Assess Your Learning activity where you get to reassess where you're at with your faith and your knowledge of Jesus and his plan.
And you just gave them an idea for something they can do next semester if they didn't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys remember the old the assessments that we would do. It felt like a final, it felt like a test. And so there was elements of that were kind of annoying, but what I did like about the exercise was it gave us a chance to go back in, and it was one more chance to have a discussion about something that happened in the past. So I do like how this Assess Your Learning 10 is not just the last several weeks, but it is the entire semester. So, all right, are we good with it? So it looks like this week we have that Assess Your Learning. You can put that at any point. You could probably put it at any point in the next 2 weeks if you want to make some adjustments. You have another chance to do a teachings of the church leaders. Have you guys had an experience with that one yet that you want to, that life prep lesson about teaching leaders that you want to add to, or it's just the template, right?
Yeah.
I think it's just a good one to go back to often.
Nikki?
Yeah, most of the teachers that I am working with, I myself haven't taught it, but most of the teachers that I'm working with like it because they're choosing talks that are relevant for the students in their class. Things are coming up, they feel like this is a good talk. They can take a whole class period talking about the principles in that talk. So I feel like overall it's been a good vibe, a
Yeah.
good thing to do.
Yeah, I love it. And warnings about that, anything that comes off the top of your head that I think if it becomes a class where you're just going to hit play and re-listen to the conference talk, you may be missing it. So just make sure that you follow the template and give them an opportunity to dig deeper and identify principles. Okay. All right. So those are the two ends on our pacing guide. You got the one on the one side, and you got assessment on the other side. We've got Mason, you described it as pretty heavy stuff this week. Articles of Faith and Official Declaration 1 and 2. Do you want to give us a kind of an overview of some of these and maybe some things to keep in mind as you're preparing for this type of week, which is church history, right?
Right. The Articles of Faith is going to be pretty straightforward, and the lesson plan is I mean, that's going to be your light day. So it might it might be nice to actually change where that comes in the week, if you want to mix up some of the heavier topics. Official declaration.
You mean put it in between the two official declarations?
Yeah, to kind of mix it up so you're not hitting them twice in a row. Official Declaration 1 is the announcement that the church is ending polygamy, and that's going to bring up a lot of questions, right? As any discussion about plural marriage does, um, and uh, and it's also too simplistic to say that the church ended polygamy in 1890. So if you have any students that are at least a little curious as to the history, right, that's a more complicated story than just let's read it and and see, isn't it all great? And then Official Declaration 2 is the announcement that priesthood and temple ordinances would now be fully available to descendants of anyone with African blood in him. And which again, reading through, we'll get into that lesson plan. The question that all of them are going to ask is not accounted for in there. Uh, why did the church do this? Right? That's not accounted for in there, um, and I understand why
It's in the supplemental material,
um,
kind of.
because there's not an easy answer for it.
Yeah.
And so the way that the lesson plan will do it is it'll focus on Elder Martins and his story. For us Hawaii people, if you know Brother Martins, who taught at BYU Hawaii for many, many years, that's his son. And so there's a little bit of a nice home story for us here in Hawaii. But I mean, these are tricky social topics that hit on two of the most popular uh, social controversies in our world today, which is the role of uh, gender inequality and racism. And so we're wading right into it with a group of young people that might have very strong views, that are probably in line with the gospel of Jesus Christ, but who also don't have the tools to go into a historical context and consider something at arm's length, and to be able to say, okay, I realize that the past is a foreign country, right? And I'm stepping into a different environment here with different values and everything, but the gospel of Jesus Christ is eternal.
Yeah.
So, and we believe in living prophets, and we also believe in ongoing revelation, right? All of these things that we're holding in, we believe that God calls prophets, and the prophets won't lead people astray, and prophets are human beings. These are huge kind of dichotomies that exist in the gospel, that can exist, but it takes a little bit of patience and faith in order to navigate through. For some of your students aren't going to care because they're not, it's not on their radar yet, or they don't feel like it has anything to do with them. Some of your students might care a lot though, and so approaching these topics is carefully and with compassion and charity is really important.
Mason, I was wondering as you were saying that how you bring up this topic and start teaching it really could determine how connected they feel to it. When you say we're going to talk about the first and second official declarations this week, they're probably going to be like, okay, great, the church made an announcement this many years ago. But if you say we are looking at something that we even face today with gender inequality and racial inequality. And so when you approach it that way, you might get a different response. And so maybe there's a caution there, but also an encouragement there to consider how you're going to talk about this, to connect them so that they'll have a desire to go and seek it out and study it out. I would say this week, it's good to show them where the resources are if they care. But even if they don't care, that there's a website, it's history.churchofjesuschrist.org. When I was looking through the material for the first official declaration, that website, it just starts out polygamy and politics because it connects to the end of slavery and the end of polygamy. And so there might be a spark among our students when we do include both of those and then teach. But that was history.churchofjesuschrist.org and then polygamy and politics.
Yeah. So here's my question. The curriculum, especially, let's just talk official declaration 1, and then we can talk 2. The curriculum is going to hone in on the document, the official declaration 1, right? It's going to hone in on Wilford Woodruff's his pitch. He's trying to. He kind of does what President Kimball does when he's trying to make some changes when it comes to the racial policy, but he's going around and he's trying to get consensus and he's trying to explain some things. But in the document itself, he makes a point where he says, to the effect of the Lord will never permit the president of the church to lead us astray. And if the president did attempt that, I would be removed out of my place. Like that. That's the principle that is highlighted in the document itself. That's what's highlighted in the curriculum. How do you balance that principle and that effort like that? It's a pro-profit lesson plan where we're trying to kind of do this. How do you kind of play that dance between the historical side of this and the principle of prophets and the role of revelation? Like as a teacher, I feel like there's a danger where if this just becomes a polygamy lesson, then we miss the curriculum. And if we only do what the curriculum says, we kind of miss some of those important features. So how would you guys approach this kind of thing? Or am I just making up a false controversy?
No, I think as Mason was sharing these two really kind of relevant topics, a third one was coming to my mind that a lot of our youth kind of are I don't think it's a struggle, but there's conversations, right? And that is the role of prophets. And there's this very interesting kind of phenomena that has entered into the church's kind of, and I use the church broadly, just the members of the church. There's these little pockets of groups that talk about how, why do we need prophets if we have the gift of the Holy Ghost? If we have the Spirit with us that guides us, then what do we need prophets for? And there's debates kind of going back and forth, and there's lots of general conference talks that kind of address, how do we know if a prophet is speaking as a prophet or if it's his opinion? And I think if we just go back, this might be a really good place, like the assess your learning. Like there's an element of assess your learning where we go back and we just ask ourselves the question, what is your testimony of living prophets? Like, what is it that you believe about them? What has been strengthened as we've studied the Doctrine and Covenants? Because I think if we just were very honest about how the Doctrine and Covenants even just came into being, it is a series of very human people wrestling with questions. And sometimes an answer was very clearly stated, I need you to do this. And there were other times where the Lord said, um, I want you to just trust me for a little bit. And sometimes answers didn't come at all, where he would give us a completely different answer. So there's a couple different places in the scriptures. Section 1, for example, would show how the Lord speaks to men according to their learning and their understanding, and also in their weaknesses. That he's going to do it through the weak and the simple. And so we need to understand, and this is going to be good. I think this is going to set us up really well also for our study of the Old Testament in a couple of weeks, where the purpose of the Old Testament is to show the weakness of man, but the power of God, the goodness of who God is. And we're going to learn some lessons there from very flawed men that we have considered prophets in the past. And we're okay with those stories because they happened way back then, whereas some of these issues that we're talking about are very, very modern. 1978, I was 3. Like, this is in my lifetime that this is happening. So because it's so much more modern, it becomes much more relevant. Section 21 of the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord tells us that we're supposed to have patience and faith when we give heed to the words of living prophets. Well, why would we need patience and faith? Because sometimes they're going to say things that is going to take us time to kind of understand the will of the Lord in it. And are we willing to trust that a prophet is in their very best efforts, their motives being pure, they're trying to do the right things, and the Lord lets us kind of stumble through issues. So we need to have a little bit of patience and faith, but knowing that. I think the true intent of that statement that the Lord won't let his prophets lead us astray, I think it comes down to intentionality. That a prophet's not going to do something to intentionally harm, to like there's nuance and there's subtlety in some of those stories. And so I think if we just kind of take a step back and just look at broader principles of how the Lord works through prophets, and then we could even go to some very specific statements. President Uchtdorf, when he was in the first presidency, coming out and very clearly just saying, and at times we have made mistakes, but mistakes lost the 110 pages. Those mistakes have never like ended the work. They just go to enhance that the Lord works through very flawed people and accomplishes his purposes there. And what is being what is never going to be what will never be lost is the authority and the keys and that connection that we have with heaven. That when the time is right, the Lord is ready to come down. He will give us those very specific things, but oftentimes he doesn't. He just lets us kind of work through it.
Yeah, Mason.
Yeah. So one thing I might do with official declaration 1 is, I mean, they don't do a case study, but I would maybe try and do, like, they do a case study for 2, but I think 1 is just as relevant. If you're living, you can do something like this, and maybe I'd lay it on a little thicker than some of our called teachers were. But so let's imagine you're living in 1890 in Utah and you're growing up there. For part of your life, the first presidency and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles have either been in prison or in hiding. For the last 30 years, so your parents and probably your grandparents fled the United States because there were genocidal policies that were being enacted against them. Okay. The United States then took over that territory again. And for the last 30 years, there's been a consistent effort from the federal government to go after structurally, theologically, the church, right? A major tenet, marriage practices, another controversy, and another social belief in today's world, whether marriage practices are legal or not, right? A certain type of marriage practice that has become central to the church. Um, Political cartoons for the last 30 years have portrayed your family as un-American, as savage, as uncivilized. The U.S. Army has in that time marched across the United States to invade your home, and and this has been a prolonged thing. And you live in a family, in a plural marriage family where you have a ton of siblings, and and just like all families, there are struggles, but there are also real feelings of love and of community, and all of that is happening. And then the prophet gets up and says, I'm issuing this manifesto to change a central practice in our religious faith, right? And for them, it was plural marriage. What's the analog for us today? I don't know, right? Like, I don't, ba- baptism by sprinkling water, or I don't know, something like that, right? Something that has become an identity marker
and
for members of the church.
and almost synonymous with
With
our understanding of eternal marriage. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And so it again, plural marriage might not, we're not going to ask our students to gain a testimony of plural marriage. Our teachers might not have a testimony of plural marriage. But we also can't discount the women and men who bore powerful testimony of plural marriage, that were living it, right? And so there's got to be a little humility when we go into this. But you paint that picture, and then you say, okay, the prophet gets up and announces this major shift. How do you respond? What might the person next to you in the pew listening to that, how might they respond?
How would your parents respond?
Yeah, exactly. Is there any room? Like, you might be really happy about it, depending on who you are. But could there be somebody that has really strong feelings the other way about that? Right. And because, I mean, in our students' lifetimes, you know, they've gone through really public, uh, a really public, chaotic discourse in their world, where there's a pandemic. Do we get vaccinated? Do we not get vaccinated? Do we do, all of these things? And and so I think that question is really relevant for them, of when the prophet says something, like, is it just true when it already naturally fits your bias? Or what happens when it doesn't naturally fit your bias? What happens when you have real, I mean, you think about living in a plural marriage, you are an enemy of the state. You can't vote for a significant portion of that time. You don't have the rights of citizenship in a lot of ways. People flee to northern Mexico so that they can have families. The only bulwark against that legal authority of the federal government is the church. And all of a sudden that bulwark gets removed. What fears might you have about the future
Well,
of your
let's
family
take it one step
relationships,
further.
right?
Let's take it one step further, is that laws that now have been enacted have been deemed constitutional, that if we continue with this practice, the government can start taking away our property.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
And
like
the
there's
church's
this,
property,
yeah,
right?
there's this very real risk there. So yeah, like this
So
is
they could
all,
lose the temples. They
yeah,
could lose, I
that's,
mean, that's all.
and maybe
Yeah.
that's where you start with your students. Like, I want you to imagine how you would feel if the government took your temple away.
Yeah.
Right. Our kids, we're raising a generation of students that have access and availability to temples that we've never seen before. Right. And so if you were to just maybe pose that question of how would you feel if You showed up one day and there's a lock on the door and there's a sign that says, by order of whatever government, because we're global now, like all around the world, we got all these temples. By order of the government, we have seized this property and you can't go in. What would be some of the reasons you would be bothered by that? And just kind of walk through some of those feelings as well.
Nikki, do you have what would be an approach? Like I like it's always good to try to get your students to think and feel what they are thinking and feeling. How would you approach this? Is this is this in line with what you would do, or how would you do it differently?
I like what both Ryan and Mason have said. I would just say, to add to that, I think that within 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes, you really could take them, ask them to find a capital P prophet or a lowercase p prophet, somebody in the scripture, a scripture hero, and just kind of map out how God asked them to change and called upon them to do some changes and accept some different things. And then in their own life, because when this declaration came out, as Mason was talking, I was thinking, I wonder if I would be more confused about God making the change and then go think about God and my relationship with him, or if I would put it on the prophet and question, can I believe in a prophet in this way that makes these kind of changes? Or would I just, how would I? And so I would give that opportunity for the youth to do the same.
Yeah.
What would your approach be? We've had a few things, just like Mason suggested. Even with President Oaks being the new prophet, there's some things you can weigh. And all of it happening for one main purpose, and that's to exalt us.
Yeah.
Everything that they went through with the official declaration 1, everything that we all went through and that our families and friends and people went through with official declaration 2 is to bring us to God. And can we do that individually? Can I take whatever comes and figure out a way to have a relationship with him?
Yeah. So this is good. I feel like official declaration 1, there is a principle here that they allude to, because they focus on the excerpts. If you were to look at it, the excerpts from 3 addresses, President Wilford Woodruff regarding the manifesto, it really focuses on that first paragraph. I actually feel that if I were to be teaching this class, I would actually be focusing on what President Lorenzo Snow said. There is, and this is one of those moments where we can actually prepare them by introducing the Temple Recommend question. Like maybe that's why that's on my head, as I do a lot of Temple Recommend interviews. But the fact that the way he says it here, there's a direct connection to DNC 13248 that says plural marriage is only going to be instituted by one who has the keys, right? And authorizing President Joseph Smith to do it. But then here, Lorenzo Snow is saying, I move that recognizing Wilford Woodruff as the president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and the only man on the earth at the present time who holds the keys, I actually would make this the center point. In preparation for the temple, that is the 4th question of the Temple Recommend. Do you sustain President Dallin H. Oaks as the only man on earth authorized to exercise all priesthood keys? There is a direct, relevant connection here. Now, I don't know how much our students are going to care about plural marriage and or the ending of it. Like, I think you can do the legwork that Mason said. And I think for some of our heady students, they're going to get there. But there could be a number of them that are just like, oh, okay. I mean, yeah, that sounds like that would suck for my great-great-great-grandpa.
So what about this idea?
Yeah.
Taking what you just said about the importance of keys. Last week, our lessons were sections 137, 138 about salvation for the dead, right? What are the purpose of these keys? These keys are for God's purpose of immortality, eternal life of his children, right? And so is there a practice or a principle that's more important than that overriding purpose of saving God's children, right? And so, yeah, we have this thing that we've been doing for 50 years. So we've been spending all this time. Paragraphs 4 and 5 of the excerpts So you said excerpt 1 gets a lot of attention. I know the curriculum does ask us to spend some time in paragraph 4 and 5. And maybe an approach might be, all right, read this about, here's this question that I want you guys to think about. What would be the wisest course? We're going to buckle, we're going to kind of bear down, and we're going to really fight against this law, right? We're going to hold fast to what I know is true right now. Or is the better option to think about those that don't have a voice right now, which is our dead ancestors? They don't have a voice, and their salvation is at risk.
You're right. He hides that, he digs deeply into the fact that we have the dead that need to be redeemed, and this becomes a larger issue.
If we put a lock on the temple, and this was something that President Nelson during the pandemic.
That was his
during
big
COVID.
push.
That was the thing that was ever present on his mind. Like, yeah, okay, we're going to be good citizens and we're going to shut down. But holy cow, I'm accountable to my predecessors about this work in the dead, and whatever is going to get temples open the fastest.
Right.
That's what I'm most worried about.
Yeah, people can freak out about how he handled some of that and requiring social distancing, masks and whatever, vaccinations. Right? But his whole goal was, we need to get the temples back open.
The work for the dead is the most important thing right now, because this is how we're going to save the largest portion of Heavenly Father's children.
So again, that's still a pretty heady thing. I wonder if there's an easy hook to this. Now, with teenagers, they're kind of selfish. They're kind of whatever. You gotta kind of get to a thing quickly. And I feel like a hook. I feel like the way I would approach this is, what feelings, what struggles, what issues would you have if you woke up this morning and there is an article in, church news, your mom sends it to you, something, and it
Facebook,
says
Instagram.
It says President Oaks has now added to the word of wisdom caffeine. Go. Like, let them do that. Like, let them have those feelings, because it's such a non-issue. We would look at that and go, that's kind of dumb. I promise you, your youth would probably go through all the emotions that just as a hypothetical. And then that takes you a step into, why would President Oaks have the power to do so? Like that gets us quickly into a principle of priesthood keys. Because then you could get to this. I know this is like, I worry that sometimes these are heavy and they are historical and there's a lot to it. I just don't know. I would be looking constantly for, how can I get 15-year-olds in 2025 to even care about this? Well, the central principle is keys. And I like where you went, Ryan, with that, because that was a prophet turning keys, because he could see what would happen if the practice continued. And then
link that with section 124, 49, where, we've already gone through this, right? They were commanded to build a temple in Jackson County. They didn't do it. What did the Lord say? Yeah, your enemies got in the way, so I'm not going to ask you to do this anymore.
Right.
Is this something where you might help them evaluate where they're at in their own thinking and learning too, where you might say at the beginning of class, what are your thoughts on this principle or on this of prophets, if you wanted to go the prophets direction? And then at the end of class, say, what have you understood more?
Yeah.
It's suggested as teachers is every once in a while we kind of clue into, if you're going to have that kind of discussion and get them all going, allow them to say, where is my faith in Jesus Christ in that, in trusting that?
I like that. I like that back.
Okay, we may have beat a dead horse on this one. Can we jump to let's look at official declaration 2, which I feel like, and maybe I'm just
a lot of the same principles apply.
Same principles.
There's kind of an arc there.
This one's more near and there's a little bit more to this, right?
Yeah.
I've actually had recently a YSA use the principles from official declaration 1 as the reason why he struggles with our racial past, right? That whole idea that
Prophet
God
won't
would
lead us
never
astray.
permit any man to lead us astray. Now, wait a second. So, official declaration 2, hooray, let's celebrate the fact that every worthy person can now enter into the temple and every worthy man can be ordained to the priesthood. But why did God let that happen in the first place? Did he just allow us to get led astray? Like I literally had this conversation 2 weeks ago with the YSA. So without injecting that type of controversy, how do you approach this? I actually love, you can get online. This is one of the best things is this is like the only scripture where you can actually watch it. Like you could pull up the video from that general conference session where they read it. Like it's a piece of history that is recorded and we can watch the video and hear the audio. I love that portion. How do we approach it though? Is this a like the header does? Here's the doctrine, right? You can go to those scriptures and we can identify, even the Book of Mormon teaches, here's the doctrine. Here's the history. Here's the correction. Like, is that how we approach this? Like, what's the best way to approach official declaration 2?
So there's in gospel topics essays, there's a race in the priesthood that they actually updated recently. Essay. It's really good. You could read that whole thing with your class. It's not that long. You could read. This isn't for me. I don't feel like this is a topic where we can just turn this into something about prophets.
Right.
Like it's too near. Like the shrapnel is still in people. You know what I mean? Like, and like I said, one of my professors in college is the son of the guy that they're talking about in this lesson. And he was the first missionary of African descent sent out after 1978.
And his story's fantastic. He's recorded in several podcasts if you wanted to listen to his story.
That question of why they might not ask it, and maybe it's not our role to introduce it. Like, but I think that essay does a really good job of recognizing that to at least attempt to lay hold of what's going on here, you have to realize that the church existed when this priesthood ban was implemented in the early 1840s. The church, or the early 1850s, the church existed in a different racial culture. And when we talk about racial culture today, it's not the same thing that we're talking about then. In 1852, when Brigham Young announces this restriction in a Utah legislature meeting, he's actually the governor of the territory at the time, and there's a war that's about to start in the United States about this very topic. Latter-day Saints in popular media at the time are not being portrayed as white. Okay, and that might not seem
go see our polygamy discussion.
Yeah, that might not seem like that makes sense, but that's how that and to be the same thing happened to Jews, the same thing happened to Poles, the same. I mean, Irish, right? There's a founding myth in the United States that you can't persecute somebody for their religion, but we've always been able to persecute somebody for their race, and so that same thing was happening as early as Missouri. Racism was a factor in the persecution of the saints, and
it might, just parenthetically, it might be important to recognize that their definition of white equaled civilized.
Exactly, and equaled citizen.
Yeah,
is the other thing, right? Equaled rights at the voting booth, equaled protection, not only
property
from the law,
ownership,
but by the law. Yeah, ownership, all those things, right? So as the saints were existing in that political environment, trying to get the rights for statehood so that they could have some autonomy, so that they could protect their religious liberties and elect their own officials and all of those things. The when the Republican Party is founded in the 1800s, its platform is to go after the twin pillars of barbarism, polygamy, and slavery. Right, and so
Not
basically,
civilized.
yeah, so it's slavery and the church is what the party's platform is against. These things overlap in a way that we will not be able to untangle for our students in class. Um, but because they're both we're talking about a foreign country, even though it's the United States, even though they speak English, it's a different world that these people lived in. Um, None of that is to say that this was just like a political move by the prophet or anything like that. But if you're gonna wade into why, we have to, like, what are we saying there? Why would God allow this? Why did the church do this? Right? And what's really being asked? What does this say about uh, things that prophets give us, things that God gives us? What does this say about, like, what are the eternal principles regarding race in the church? And can we go to a place that actually gives more? If a policy can change, and it wasn't always described as a policy, but if a policy can change like this, that's such dramatic impact as, can somebody access the temple and temple ordinances? Um, then what is the doctrine? How do we find the doctrine with a policy like that? I mean, this might feel heady, but this is a heady topic.
Yeah.
And it might just be the case that this is the first coat of paint that we're able to put on. But if we avoid these topics because they're uncomfortable, um, then what we're doing is we're kicking the can down the road into the point where they start to care, and then they're going to turn around and say, nobody ever talked about this.
Right.
Right.
Sometimes I've
So
found
let's
that,
talk about it.
yeah, sometimes I find that my students are unaware of how recent this all happened too. Like I remember in our common world of ALA Ironwood, one of my students coming in one day and going, "Brother Anderson, did we really not let blacks have the priesthood until 1978?" And going, yeah, like, and he's like, 1970. I thought that was like way back, like pioneer times. And so there's a bit of a shock factor when our students like might learn that this was less than 50 years ago.
Do you know what could be a really great resource? And they have it cut. They're using it a little bit in the supplemental. This B1 celebration,
I was just about to say that.
where they
So
actually
good.
they actually share the stories. They have pictures. People are describing certain elements of this. I would consider taking elements of the B1. You obviously can't just push play and walk away. That's not good enough. You're going to need to use it as a tool to facilitate the discussion. But there's some moments where, if you want to tell the story, they tell the story of what it was like to be Black members of the church in the territory during this time. I love the story that they keep telling as it kind of progressed through time. It's a joyful. They do a really good job telling the story of what it was like when the policy was reversed. Like President Oaks gives a great message at the end, and they have it actually quoted. They actually have the thing at the bottom
Where he was when he heard.
Yeah, and how
he was
felt.
president of BYU at the time.
He's like, I observed the consequences of this ban. Like Elder Hollins, President Hollins says the same thing. He'll talk about how he was watching this stuff, and they were all those who were considerate and intentional, and they were all aware of the ban. They were all aware of its consequences, and they were all praying for a change and the celebration that took place when it happened. So There's some really great stories, and you can find a lot of them just in that 1 hour video that's attached.
Or in Saints. I would say that this is maybe our first caution for our teachers. Um, Oftentimes the criticism that this generation has is they feel like we're hiding things from them. The uncomfortable aspects of our history, they feel like gets whitewashed a little bit, and I don't use that pun intentionally. Um, and so I think our first warning is teachers, let's not be afraid to just lean into it that this is a topic that has been troubling. It's been troubling for most of us. Having to kind of
we should practice saying I don't know.
yeah,
So-
and in fact, I think the curriculum and the supplemental material, I probably where I would start is that um, learn the explain activity, because there is an explain activity that asks us to just a little mini kind of role play. If someone were to ask you why the priesthood and temple restrictions existed, how would you explain the why behind it? And that's kind of where we need to be really good at, because President Oaks in one of his books, I think it was lessons I've learned or things that I've learned in the past. Like anyway, one of my favorite quotes that he gives in that, he said, the Lord is oftentimes the Lord doesn't give us reasons why. And where we get into trouble is when we try to put reasons to the Lord's commands that he himself hasn't given. And then he says, and in this topic regarding restrictions, the racial restrictions in the past, we not only were wrong, we were spectacularly wrong in some of the reasons that were given as to why this ban existed. And the essay does a really good job of just really spelling out that the church has completely come in opposition to some of the reasons in the past. We don't accept those, even though they continue to still kind of exist in the culture of the church. The church has very clearly come out in opposition to some of those reasons that.
Well, and they're also clear with what your students will ask: is this a revelation or not? Did the ban happen because God told Brigham to do it? It's probably wise for you as a teacher to go, I don't know. I don't know.
You can say we don't have record of a revelation,
right,
where that command was given.
And the church walks that really interesting line of not saying that this was a revelation and not saying that it wasn't.
And in subsequent administrations, prophets were very hesitant to kind of go against the precedent of their predecessors.
Right.
President Nelson's really quite revolutionary in that regard. and that's something that will be foreign to some of our students. But I mean, as early as Heber J. Grant and David O. McKay, the question about why are we doing this was being asked, and there was a hesitancy to kind of go against precedent. And as that kind of progresses, and this is in an amazing article that Edward Kimball, President Kimball's son, wrote. But they kind of the mentality and the attitude of the brethren was that if a change were to come, it would have to be through a revelatory process.
What's amazing is you can, like, there's a Saints Unscripted video where they go through some of these questions and issues. What I learned as I look at this a little bit deeper, Spencer W. Kimball does not receive confirmation until they decide.
Well, until he's got all of them kind of going in the same direction.
He's feeling the feelings of the change. He himself wants this, and he's looking at what's happening in Africa, and he wants this, and he's going around to individual members of the Quorum of the 12 seeking some unanimous feelings. But it's not until they get together and they actually say, I propose. And then the heavens open and the sound of rushing waters. And President Hinckley's little quote here in the supplemental, talking about how that moment changed him and anybody else in the room, I think is a fabulous demonstration of how sometimes God works through his prophets.
You know what's interesting, Rick, is that really it's the Sao Paulo temple that's really got them at a that's
Yeah.
really it's this really sticky thing that now you have this Sao Paulo temple and you have Brazil that you want to talk about being as racially
Yeah.
ambiguous.
We can
Like
give
there's
Sao
no clear
Paulo,
answer.
we
Yeah.
can give Brazil full credit for really putting this front and center. Some of the things that they had to figure out was okay. So we can wax eloquent. We can talk more. Nikki, do you want to add to this discussion?
I think that it's easy to assume how they felt too if we're not careful. So making sure that we're hearing their voices at some point. I'm lucky I get to teach this, and I already know I get to. I'm going to be in Prince William, this Prince William area on Craig Island this next week, and they've asked me to teach this. And so as I'm thinking about it, I'm excited to allow those testimonies. There's a video. Rare footage of first baptisms in West Africa. Oh, it doesn't matter if you can see it, but it's on the church's website, and you guys probably already know this, but again, I feel like resources are helpful. Even just repeatedly showing the youth that there are places that they can go to find answers. So it's Black Mormon Pioneers, a lot of individual testimony and voices, and it would be interesting in your class if each of the students had a different pioneer to look into, maybe some that they've never heard before. Jane Manning is more one that we talk about more often. We can do hers as well because it's powerful, but maybe even some of those.
Elijah Abel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Saints Volume 4 really outlines African pioneers as they're kind of working through it.
So if they had a chance to hear the voice of these people and then have them find what is the underlining principle that brought all of them in to have faith in God and patience as it was his timing. When things were happening, we were all working together, and Mason, you were helpful for me because I think the lack of knowledge houses prejudice that you don't even know you have. So I love the idea of stirring the pot a little bit. When the murder of George Floyd happened and Black Lives Matter, and you took a different role during that time, that I was a little embarrassed that I didn't feel as connected to it. So I had to kind of do a little introspection. And so as teachers and as invitations to students, I think it's okay to feel uncomfortable about this because you're taking it to the Lord to say, where do I stand? How do I more align with thee and with the way you look at your children? And so that we can work out some of those, maybe even jokes that we say or ways that we treat others that are really not aligned with what God would have us do.
You remember during that whole thing, President Oaks was giving a talk at BYU, and he purposely said Black Lives Matter, and then it showed up as a banner across the screen and stayed there for a long time. Like, interesting how we are now at the forefront of this building bridges initiative with people of all races. Like, it's interesting. Sorry, I interrupted.
This like, it can be easy to think that these are historical topics, and then that kind of tag switches part of our brain off or puts it,
in the past.
Even if you look at, like, images or video from the civil rights, the fact that those aren't in color makes it feel so foreign and so in the past. These are pressing topics, and not to, like, this is not a platform to exercise our own political partisanship or bias at all. These are pressing topics because the restoration truly is, for the first time in history, able to be a global movement. It's able. We now have the reach and the resources to invite all of God's children on either side of the veil to come to Christ and to make covenants with him. And there are biases, implicit, sometimes explicit biases, that come from living in tight communities that are sometimes set apart from the world, that those walls have to come down. Otherwise, it's not that the restoration won't go forward. It's that if we have walls in our hearts, again, that separate us from other of God's children, we won't be able to participate fully in the restoration. That's the thing. Is similar to the prayer circle, right? We're invited, but if what's going on in our own heart won't allow us to accept that invitation, the prayer circle goes on without us,
Right.
right? And if we're taking seriously the prophecies about the last days, and also both ancient and modern, like we know that the miracles that will come increasingly outshine any miracles that have happened, that there will be more and more reason for people to separate themselves from the covenant, right? And it might be people who have traditionally thought themselves safe within the covenant, right? But if we're not exercising faith in Jesus Christ, repenting, following living prophets, um, then, like, if we do that, it's gonna be a clear shot, right? We're gonna have a really clear path to walk. But especially our students, like, one of the best things that they could do at a young age is gain a fierce testimony that God calls living prophets. Um, their life in the covenant and will be glorious, and they will be able to participate in things that prophets have looked forward to for dispensations since the beginning of time. That's what's being offered to them. And some of these, if we avoid or don't help to guide them through some of these questions that present themselves readily to them, but without a lot of sophistication, like on TikTok or like on Instagram, if people want to throw bombs at the church, like, these are navigable things. The Lord can speak to them. The Lord can answer the doubts of their heart, so that we can get to work, right? And so I think the work this week is actually really, it's essential work for what the Lord's going to ask these young people to do as they lead the church.
Yeah.
I think at some point, I think if I were teaching the week, so we've talked about trying to create this unified arc of a week, and you start with wherever you put the articles of faith, and I love the how student focused the article of faith lesson is. But I think at some point, um, with these two topics of, plural marriage and the ending of plural marriage and the role of prophets and the 1970, at some point I think I would try to ask the question and really save some time, and whether I have it written on the board and it's just on the board all week long, and we just go back to it over and over again. But the question I would probably want to make sure that I give my students some time to ask is, what do we come to know about who Jesus Christ is? And there may seem to be like, well, he we don't really, I mean, it's these are press announcements. Like, this is Wilford Woodruff putting out a press release. This is Spencer W. Kimball putting out a press release that's announcing like these kind of really essential policy changes. So we have to do a little more work of reading between the lines a little bit of what are we to learn about who Jesus is? What what work do we need to do to kind of come to understand his character and his love and his perfection through these kind of really big historical moments? But the overarching objective is our discipleship to him. How do we learn to trust Jesus Christ more, have more confidence in his power to save, his ability to work through? Like, what does this teach us about who Jesus is? And at some point, we need to have that conversation where we kind of, all right, let's unlock ourselves from this very specific point in time and let's broaden this out a little bit. What did we learn about who Jesus is from all of this?
Nikki, final thought on the week?
Yeah, I am grateful for an opportunity. Mason said it's important that they figure out their testimony of prophets, but I would also add to that that President Nelson said, take charge of your testimony. And this is exactly what we're doing. We're talking to them about things so that they can go into the resources and study for themselves and ask God. And so a great pattern of learning this week again to end the semester very yay, we did it. And we've learned about church history in a way that we've connected it to Jesus Christ, just as Ryan just testified.
I love it. I love it. This is discipleship, rubber meets the road here. Like these are, we want our students to feel deeply about things. And this is going to be a week where they can feel deeply about some aspects of the gospel of Jesus Christ and ultimately the plan of happiness that has some real consequences. And what a great opportunity that we get to facilitate that and be present and participate. If you run into issues, whether it's in your prepping or maybe something happens in class and you don't know how to resolve it, reach out to your coordinator so that we can offer resources and suggestions and we can be of help to you. But this week is going to be really great. And what a great way to kind of lead up to the end of our study of church history and Doctrine and Covenants. So we love you. Good luck. Let us know if you need us.